Psalm 91 says that no plague will come near your dwelling. It says that 1,000 may fall at your side and 10,000 at your right hand, but the danger will not reach you. For centuries, frightened people have whispered these words beside sickbeds, carried them into wars, left the Bible open to them during storms, and repeated them when everything familiar began to collapse. But there is a troubling question hidden inside this beloved prayer. An ancient Jewish tradition connects Psalm 91 with the world of Moses, a wilderness marked not by comfort, but by rebellion, disease, danger, and loss. In that wilderness, people did fall. Families did grieve. The journey did not become painless simply because God was near. So what kind of protection is Psalm 91 actually promising? Is it a guarantee that faithful people will never suffer? Is the secret place of the Most High an invisible barrier that keeps every tragedy outside? And if it is, what are we supposed to believe when suffering crosses the threshold anyway? The answer is not found by ignoring the difficult verses. It is found by reading the psalm all the way to the moment when God Himself speaks. He shall call upon me, and I will answer him. I will be with him in trouble. Not far from trouble, not untouched by trouble. With him in trouble. That sentence opens the mystery of Psalm 91. And once we understand it, the wilderness begins to look different. This film presents a dramatized interpretation inspired by biblical accounts, historical context, Jewish tradition, and Christian theology. Psalm 91 is anonymous in the Hebrew Bible, while a later interpretive tradition associates it with Moses and the wilderness generation. Some scenes and narrative details have been artistically reconstructed. This film is not intended as a definitive historical or theological account. Viewers are encouraged to examine the biblical texts and consider the different traditions surrounding them. The wind moves across the wilderness without asking who is strong and who is afraid. It passes over stone ridges, dry channels, thorn bushes, and tents secured against the open sky. During the hottest hours, shade becomes precious. After sunset, the same exposed ground releases its heat, and the darkness changes the shape of every sound. The biblical wilderness is not one single landscape. Israel's journey moves through different regions and different seasons. Yet the scriptural memory of that journey is consistent. The people are vulnerable. They depend on water they cannot manufacture, food they cannot grow, and guidance they cannot control. Deuteronomy remembers that great and terrible wilderness, with fiery serpents, scorpions, and thirsty ground where there was no water. Exodus describes manna arriving with the morning and water being provided when the community had none. Numbers preserve stories of rebellion, judgment, disease, conflict, and grief. The biblical account also describes the scale of the departing community in extraordinary terms. About 600,000 men on foot, besides women and children. Whatever questions modern readers may ask about how those numbers should be understood historically, the narrative wants us to feel the immensity of the multitude. This is not a small family crossing a quiet valley. It is an entire people learning how to exist without the structures they knew in Egypt. They have left slavery, but they have not yet learned trust. They have crossed the sea, but Egypt still lives inside their imagination. They have received freedom, but freedom in the wilderness feels frightening because it can't be stored in a warehouse or guarded behind a city wall. Then comes the rebellion recorded in Numbers 13 and 14. The spies return from Canaan. Fear spreads through the camp. The people refuse to enter the land. According to the biblical judgment that follows, The numbered generation from 20 years old and upward will die in the wilderness, with Joshua and Caleb explicitly named as exceptions. The journey becomes more than travel. It becomes the long passing of one generation and the formation of another. Within that story, Moses experiences losses close to him. Miriam dies at Kadesh. Aaron dies on Mount Hor. Moses himself will see the promised land from a distance, but will not cross the Jordan with the people. This is the world that later Jewish interpretation brings into conversation with Psalm 91. The Hebrew text of Psalm 91 does not name its author. It has no superscription identifying Moses, David, Solomon, or anyone else. But because Psalm 90 is introduced as a prayer of Moses, later tradition associated a sequence of 11 psalms with him. Psalm 91 was therefore heard as part of a Mosaic voice, a prayer interpreted through the memory of tents, plagues, enemies, serpents, and wilderness dependence. That tradition is not the same thing as proof of authorship, but it gives us a powerful interpretive lens. Instead of imagining the psalm first in a peaceful room, imagine hearing it in an exposed camp. Imagine a community that cannot pretend danger is theoretical. Imagine parents listening to the night beyond the tent walls. Imagine sentries watching the ridges. Imagine someone coughing in a neighboring shelter. Imagine the first light revealing that the road ahead is still dry, still uncertain, and still necessary. Now hear the opening words. He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. These are not necessarily the words of someone who has never been frightened. They are the words of faith spoken where fear has reasons. Today, Psalm 91 often appears in an entirely different setting. A Bible lies open on a table. The page has remained in the same place for months. The verses are printed on cards, engraved on jewelry, placed near doorways, carried in wallets, or sent to someone before a journey. There is nothing wrong with surrounding ourselves with Scripture. Human beings need reminders. We forget courage. We forget mercy. We forget what we believe when fear begins speaking loudly. But a reminder can slowly become something else. The psalm can be treated like a spiritual security system. Read these words, repeat them correctly, believe them without hesitation, and nothing painful will be allowed to enter your life. Under that interpretation, faith becomes a transaction. We supply confidence. God supplies immunity. Then real life refuses to follow the formula. A medical test returns with an answer no one wanted. A source of income disappears while responsibilities remain. A relationship built over years is damaged by betrayal. The caregiver becomes exhausted from carrying needs that never pause. Anxiety steals sleep, and the lack of sleep weakens the body. And the weakened body makes every fear feel more convincing. Grief affects concentration. Financial pressure enters a marriage. Chronic pain changes a person's patience. Isolation magnifies shame. One wound connects itself to another until it becomes difficult to remember where the trouble began. These are not separate deserts. They are connected regions of the same human wilderness. And when suffering arrives, a person who was taught to read Psalm 91 as a contract faces a second injury. The first injury is the suffering itself. The second is the suspicion that God has failed, or that the sufferer did not believe strongly enough. That second injury can be devastating. It turns prayer into self-accusation. It makes a frightened person search for the exact moment when faith supposedly became too weak. It allows others to stand at a safe distance and explain tragedy with cruel simplicity. But Scripture does not permit that simplicity. Job is called righteous and still enters a season of profound loss. Elijah obeys God and still becomes exhausted beneath a desert tree. Jeremiah speaks faithfully and is still rejected. The apostles proclaim the gospel and still experience prisons, illness, persecution, and grief. The Bible does not teach that suffering is always evidence of weak faith. It repeatedly shows faithful people discovering God in circumstances they would never have chosen. Psalm 91 must therefore be read as poetry of trust, not as a mechanical formula. Biblical poetry speaks truly through image, parallelism, testimony, wisdom, and promise. It gives us a world in which to live. It does not invite us to turn every line into a private insurance policy detached from the rest of Scripture. This does not mean the promises are empty. It means they are deeper than the shallowest way we have sometimes used them. The psalm is not asking us to deny danger. It names danger with unusual honesty. The snare, the pestilence, the terror at night, the arrow by day, the destruction at noon, the lion, the serpent, trouble itself. This is not the vocabulary of denial. It is the vocabulary of a person looking directly at a world that cannot be controlled. The question is not whether danger exists. The question is where the soul will dwell while danger exists. He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. The Hebrew word often translated secret place is cedar. It can refer to a hiding place, shelter, concealment, or covering. The word does not require us to imagine one mysterious geographic location known only to a few spiritual experts. The psalm is not giving directions to a hidden cave. It is describing a life placed within the protection and presence of God. The first verb matters as much as the shelter. He who dwells, not the person who visits for a moment only when panic rises, not the person who uses a verse as an emergency charm and then returns immediately to self-sufficiency. To dwell is to remain, to make a home, to return again and again until trust becomes a practiced location of the heart. Then the image changes from shelter to shadow. The Hebrew word is sel. For people living in a hot and exposed environment, shadow is not decorative. It is relief. It is covering. It is a place where the body can stop fighting the full force of the sun. The image also suggests nearness. A shadow belongs to the presence of something greater than the person resting beneath it. The psalm is not teaching a scientific law about distance from God. It is using physical experience to express dependence. The vulnerable life finds covering in the one who does not move with every change of weather. The wilderness tradition contains another image that deepens this language. Israel is guided by cloud during the day and fire during the night. Psalm 105 later describes God spreading a cloud for a covering. The biblical writers remember divine presence not as an abstract idea floating far above the people, but as guidance accompanying them on the road. The cloud did not turn the wilderness into a garden. Manna did not make the people incapable of hunger forever. Water from the rock did not eliminate every future moment of thirst. Provision came with independence. Guidance came within movement. Presence came within exposure. That distinction is essential. We often want God to become a wall between us and reality. The psalm first gives us God as the reality in which we take refuge. Verse 2 makes the confession personal. I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God. In Him will I trust. The speaker does not say, my circumstances are my refuge. The speaker does not say, "My health is my fortress." The speaker does not say, "My savings, my reputation, my knowledge, my strength, or my ability to predict the future will keep me secure." Those things may be valuable. Wisdom matters. Planning matters. Medicine matters. Community matters. Locks, shelter, preparation, and responsible action matter. But none of them can carry the full weight of the human soul. Health can change. Plans can fail. Institutions can disappoint. People can leave. Even our own minds can become difficult places in which to live. The confession, "My God," is not an escape from responsible action. It is the refusal to make temporary supports carry the weight of ultimate trust. The wilderness exposes false fortresses. It reveals which securities were useful tools and which ones had quietly become gods. That revelation can be painful, but it can also be the beginning of freedom. Because if safety depends entirely on controlling every outcome, no human being will ever be safe. But if refuge begins with belonging to God, then fear no longer has the authority to define the entire landscape. The storm may still be a storm. The diagnosis may still require treatment. The loss may still need to be grieved. The wrong may still need to be confronted. But the person facing these things is not reduced to them. There is a place within the truth where panic is not king. That is the secret place. Before the psalm names the dangers surrounding the camp, it gives us two more images of protection. "He shall cover thee with his feathers, and under his wings shalt thou trust." The language changes again. God has been called a shelter and a fortress. Those images suggest strength, height, and stability. Now the psalm describes protection through the wings of a bird, gathering the vulnerable beneath its own body. The image is not about distance. It is about care. A fortress protects through walls. A mother bird protects through nearness, attention, and self-exposure. The young do not survive because they understand every threat in the sky. They survive by responding to the call and remaining beneath the covering prepared for them. This image appears elsewhere in Scripture. Ruth comes to seek refuge beneath the wings of the God of Israel. Other psalms ask to be hidden beneath the shadow of God's wings until danger passes. Jesus looks at Jerusalem and speaks of longing to gather its children as a hen gathers her brood. The metaphor is tender, but it is not weak. It tells us that divine protection is not cold administration. The one called Almighty is not presented as an indifferent power operating at a distance. The shelter has affection. The fortress knows who has entered it. That matters when suffering becomes personal. Pain often creates the fear that we have become invisible. Other people continue their ordinary routines. Conversations move forward. Schedules remain full. Yet the person carrying grief may feel as though time has stopped in one private room no one else can see. The wings answer that fear with belonging. The psalm does not describe a number hidden inside a crowd. It describes a life known, gathered, and covered. Then the metaphor changes once more. His truth shall be thy shield and buckler. The Hebrew word translated truth in the King James tradition can also carry the sense of faithfulness, reliability, or firmness. The shield is not our ability to maintain perfect emotional certainty. It is God's faithfulness. That distinction releases the frightened person from another impossible burden. The psalm does not say, "The intensity of your confidence will be your shield." It does not say, "Your ability to eliminate every doubt will be your shield." It points away from the unstable measurements of human emotion and toward the character of God. Some days trust feels strong. Other days trust may be no more than the decision to whisper one honest prayer. The shield does not become fragile because the hand holding it is tired. God's faithfulness is not produced by our nervous system. It is not strengthened by adrenaline or weakened by tears. This does not mean truth functions as a magical object. It means the soul is guarded by returning to what is reliable when fear begins inventing conclusions. Fear says, "Because I do not know what happens next, nothing good can happen next." Faithfulness answers, "The future is unknown to me, but I am not unknown to God." Fear says, "Because help has not arrived yet, help will never arrive." Faithfulness answers, "Delay is painful, but delay is not proof of abandonment." Fear says, "Because one support has failed, everything beneath me must fail." Faithfulness answers, "A human support can break without the character of God breaking with it." Now the psalm is ready to name the dangers. It has established shelter, shadow, wings, and shield. Not 4 different techniques for forcing a miracle. 4 images teaching one vulnerable soul where trust can rest. Psalm 91 does not leave danger unnamed. It begins with something hidden. "Surely he shall deliver thee from the snare of the fowler." The fowler is a trapper of birds. The Hebrew imagery points to a snare or net concealed for prey. The danger succeeds by remaining unseen until escape becomes difficult. This is different from an enemy standing openly on the road. The snare is deception. It is a threat disguised as safety. It is the agreement whose true cost appears later. The habit that promises relief and slowly becomes a prison. The flattering voice that studies a weakness before exploiting it. The secret compromise that seems small until it begins determining every decision around it. The psalm begins here because not every danger announces itself. Some dangers roar. Others wait quietly beneath ordinary ground. Then the psalm divides fear across the hours. "Thou shalt not be afraid for the terror by night, nor for the arrow that flieth by day." The terror by night is broad language. It should not be reduced to one specific historical event. For an ancient traveler, the night could hold raiders, animals, sudden weather, illness, or sounds that could not be identified. Darkness removed information, and the absence of information allowed imagination to multiply danger. That experience has not disappeared. The modern night may be physically secure and still become mentally hostile. The room is quiet, but the mind begins rehearsing every possible loss. An unanswered message becomes rejection. A physical sensation becomes a catastrophe. A financial concern becomes a future in which everything is gone. At night, fear often speaks in complete sentences about events that have not happened. Psalm 91 does not shame the frightened person. It speaks to fear as a real force and directs attention toward a greater reality. Then morning arrives, and the danger becomes visible. "Nor for the arrow that flieth by day." In the ancient world, an arrow could be exactly what the word says. A weapon crossing open space before the target could respond. Within poetry, it can also represent dangers that arrive quickly and from a distance. The important contrast is not that night is imaginary and day is real. Both contain danger. At night, the threat is difficult to see. By day, the threat may be fully visible and already in motion. Some suffering grows slowly, in secret. Other suffering arrives in one conversation, one letter, one phone call, one decision made by someone far away. The psalm refuses to say that faith makes us untouchable. It says fear does not have to become our master. The next threat cannot be stopped with a shield, nor for the pestilence that walketh in darkness. The Hebrew word is deber, pestilence, plague, disease moving through a population. The wilderness narratives contain outbreaks in which many people die. Numbers records one plague that takes 14,700 lives and another that takes 24,000. The text does not require us to invent exactly how quickly every death occurred or what the camp looked like afterward. The numbers themselves communicate collective catastrophe. Disease is frightening because it crosses boundaries the eye cannot guard. An army can be watched from a wall. A plague may move before anyone knows it is present. The ancient community did not possess modern hospitals, laboratories, antibiotics, or an understanding of microorganisms. People could observe symptoms and consequences while remaining unable to see the agent passing among them. That is why pestilence walks in darkness. The image gives movement to something invisible. It enters the psalm not merely as an ancient concern, but as a permanent human fear. The body can become a place of uncertainty. Something beyond our awareness can alter strength, plans, relationships, finances, and the way we imagine the future. Faith does not require pretending that illness is harmless. It allows us to say that illness is real without saying that illness is sovereign. Then comes the danger at the opposite extreme of the clock. Nor for the destruction that wasteth at noonday. The Hebrew word translated destruction is keteb. It can carry the sense of destruction, plague, or a devastating force. In the psalm, it is paired with noon, the hour of the maximum visibility. Darkness concealed the pestilence. Noon conceals nothing. The light is complete and danger still remains. Later rabbinic tradition would personify Keteb as a destructive being associated with the hours around midday. That interpretation belongs to the later history of how Jewish readers received the word. We should not automatically project the full rabbinic image back into the mind of the original psalmist. But the later tradition reveals how intensely readers felt the language. Keteb was not heard as mild discomfort. It represented a force of devastation beyond ordinary human control. Now look at the map the psalm has created. A trap hidden on the ground, terror in the night, an arrow in daylight, pestilence moving unseen, destruction at noon. The poem has covered hidden danger and visible. Danger, human violence and disease. Darkness and blazing light. It is a poetic way of saying there is no hour in which the human creature becomes self-sufficient. There is also no hour in which God becomes absent. That second truth is the foundation of courage, not the denial of the first. The psalm continues, 1,000 shall fall at thy side, and 10,000 at thy right hand, but it shall not come nigh thee. These are among the most difficult words in the prayer. They sound absolute because they are absolute within the poetic testimony being offered. The speaker imagines devastation on every side and declares that God is able to preserve the one who trusts in him. We should not weaken that confidence until it means nothing. God does deliver. Lives are spared in ways people recognize and in ways they never see. Disasters are prevented. Bodies recover. Doors open. Help arrives. Warnings come in time. Many people can look back and identify moments when protection was unmistakable. Gratitude for those moments is not naive. But neither should we turn one poetic declaration into a universal prediction that every faithful person will survive every earthly danger. The rest of Scripture will not permit that conclusion. Faithful people suffer. Faithful people die. Martyrs are not failed believers. A person who does not recover is not evidence that prayer was worthless. A family experiencing tragedy should not be forced to defend its faith while it is still trying to breathe. Psalm 91 speaks a complete confidence in God's protective power. The Bible's larger witness teaches us to hold that confidence beside lament, mortality, resurrection, and the mystery of providence. This is not a contradiction solved by one clever sentence. It is a tension in which generations of believers have learned to pray. The psalm then says, "There shall no evil befall thee, neither shall any plague come nigh thy dwelling." Again, the language is fearless. But notice what the psalm does not say. It does not teach us to accuse sufferers. It does not tell us that medicine is unbelief. It does not command reckless behavior as a demonstration of trust. It does not give human beings permission to manufacture danger and then demand that God perform a rescue. That last distinction becomes decisive when Psalm 91 appears again in the wilderness story of Jesus. Before we reach that moment, however, the psalm reveals who speaks and what protection finally means. Psalm 91 moves through several voices. It begins with a general declaration. "He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty." Then comes personal confession. "I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress." The poem continues with assurances addressed to you. God will cover you. You will not fear. His angels will guard you. You will tread upon the lion and the serpent. Then, in verse 14, the voice changes. God speaks in the first person. "Because he hath set his love upon me, therefore will I deliver him." The protection of the psalm is no longer being described only by a worshiper or teacher. The final oracle places the promise in the mouth of God. "I will set him on high, because he hath known my name. He shall call upon me, and I will answer him." Then comes the line that prevents us from turning the entire psalm into a promise of permanent comfort. "I will be with him in trouble." The word trouble remains in the sentence. God does not say, "Because he loves me, trouble will never exist." He says, "I will be with him in trouble." Presence is not the whole meaning of deliverance, but it is the place where deliverance begins. Sometimes deliverance means prevention. Sometimes it means a path through danger. Sometimes it means strength that does not seem possible until the hour requires it. Sometimes it arrives through physicians, friends, strangers, communities, or decisions made at exactly the needed moment. Sometimes the answer remains hidden from us, and faith must coexist with questions that do not resolve on our timetable. And within the wider biblical hope, deliverance ultimately reaches beyond death itself. The verse continues, "I will deliver him and honor him. With long life will I satisfy him and show him my salvation." Long life is a familiar blessing in biblical wisdom. It expresses fullness, favor, and the goodness of life received from God. Yet Scripture does not pretend every righteous person reaches the same age or experiences the same earthly outcome. The final word is salvation. The psalm opens with shelter and ends with God allowing the faithful person to see his saving work. That is a much larger promise than the guarantee that nothing painful will ever happen. It is the promise that trouble will not have the authority to separate the person from God's presence, silence every prayer, or define the final meaning of a life. This is why the psalm can be prayed in a hospital without becoming a denial of medicine. It can be prayed during unemployment without pretending the bills are imaginary. It can be prayed after betrayal without avoiding the work of truth and boundaries. It can be prayed in grief without demanding that tears disappear before morning. The psalm gives pain a language larger than a panic. It teaches the soul to call. It teaches the frightened person to dwell, rather than flee inwardly from one terror to another. It teaches trust without requiring illusion. And then the adversary quotes it. Centuries after Israel's wilderness journey, the Gospel of Matthew leads us into another barren place. Jesus has fasted 40 days and 40 nights. He is hungry. He is physically weakened, alone in the wilderness, and confronted by the tempter. The first temptation concerns bread. The second takes the language of trust and tries to transform it into spectacle. The devil brings Jesus to the holy city and places him on the pinnacle of the temple. Then the tempter quotes Psalm 91. He shall give his angels charge concerning thee. In their hands they shall bear thee up, lest at any time thou dash thy foot against a stone. The quotation comes from verses 11 and 12. This is one of the most unsettling moments in the Gospels because the words themselves are biblical. The danger does not arrive through an obvious rejection of Scripture. It arrives through Scripture detached from trust, wisdom, and obedience. The temptation is simple. If God protects you, force Him to prove it. Create the danger yourself. Turn relationship into demonstration. Turn the Father into a mechanism. Jump and make heaven respond on command. Jesus refuses. He answers from Deuteronomy, "Thou shalt not tempt the Lord thy God." Or, in modern wording, "Do not put the Lord your God to the test." Jesus does not deny Psalm 91. He refuses the interpretation that turns protection into entitlement. He will not use the promise as permission for recklessness. He will not manufacture a crisis to control God. He will not confuse trust with the demand for a miraculous performance. That exchange gives us a necessary rule for reading the psalm. Any interpretation that invites presumption has misunderstood refuge. Any interpretation that treats God as a vending machine has misunderstood relationship. Any interpretation that blames every sufferer for failing to activate the promise has forgotten the one who refused to jump. Jesus trusted the Father completely. That trust did not lead him away from every painful road. It led him through obedience. The Gospels move from the wilderness toward villages, crowds, opposition, Gethsemane, the cross, and the tomb. In the garden, Jesus experiences anguish and prays with extraordinary intensity. Luke describes his sweat becoming like drops of blood falling to the ground. At the cross, he is not spared the reality of human cruelty or physical suffering. Christian faith does not hide that fact. It places the cross at the center of the story. If Psalm 91 meant that perfect trust always prevents bodily suffering, Jesus would make the psalm impossible to understand. Instead, Jesus reveals a deeper horizon. The Father's faithfulness is not measured by whether Jesus avoids every wound. It is revealed through obedience, sustaining grace, the defeat of sin, and resurrection. God does not allow the tomb to become the final word. On the third day, Christian proclamation declares that Jesus is raised. The stone is moved, the place of burial is empty. Death, which appeared to have closed the story, is forced to surrender its claim to finality. From a Christian reading, this is where the salvation promised at the end of Psalm 91 reaches its fullest horizon. Protection is not reduced to surviving every danger for a few more years. Salvation means that even death cannot permanently remove the faithful from the life of God. This does not make present pain small. Resurrection is not permission to rush grieving people past grief. Jesus himself weeps at the tomb of Lazarus, even though he knows resurrection is near. Hope does not insult sorrow. Hope enters sorrow and refuses to abandon it. That is the difference between a slogan and a refuge. A slogan must pretend everything is already fine. A refuge is strong enough to receive the truth. Most people watching this film will never cross the Sinai on foot. But the wilderness continues to change its shape. It appears in the space between receiving a diagnosis and understanding what comes next. It appears when work disappears, obligations remain, and every decision affects someone else in the home. It appears when trust is broken, and the person who was once a source of safety becomes the source of uncertainty. It appears in long-term caregiving, when love is genuine, but exhaustion is also genuine. It appears after a funeral, when the public rituals end and ordinary rooms suddenly feel unfamiliar. It appears in anxiety that connects one fear to another until the entire future looks dangerous. These wounds are interrelated because human beings are not divided into separate compartments. What affects the body can affect the mind. What affects finances can affect relationships. What affects trust can affect sleep. What affects sleep can affect hope. The wilderness strips away the illusion that one part of life can collapse without touching another. Psalm 91 does not promise that these connections will never exist. It offers a different center from which to face them. My refuge, my fortress, my God. These words are not a command to feel strong every moment. They are words to return to when strength is incomplete. Dwelling may look less dramatic than we expect. It may mean praying one honest sentence instead of performing confidence. It may mean accepting help before exhaustion becomes collapse. It may mean consulting a physician, counselor, pastor, or trusted friend. It may mean setting a boundary where fear once demanded silence. It may mean allowing grief to be grief without interpreting every tear as unbelief. It may mean remembering that God's presence is not canceled by the fact that the outcome remains uncertain. The psalm says, "He shall call upon me, and I will answer him." Calling is an act of relationship. It assumes there is someone to hear. The answer may come as clarity. It may come as endurance. It may come as intervention. It may come through another person who enters the wilderness and helps carry what has become too heavy for one pair of hands. Even the angels in Psalm 91 are described as servants charged to guard. The protection of God does not always arrive as an invisible feeling. Throughout Scripture, divine care repeatedly takes embodied form through messengers, communities, provision, warning, and companionship. There is no shame in needing those forms of care. A refuge is not proven by standing outside it alone. The secret place is not isolation. It is belonging. Now return to the wilderness. The tents are still vulnerable. The road is still long. The people still do not know everything the next horizon contains. But above the camp, the cloud remains part of their story. Within the later Mosaic reading of Psalm 91, this is the mystery. The wilderness can be real without becoming God. Danger can be named without being worshipped. Mortality can humble the human creature without erasing the faithfulness of the Creator. The psalm does not ask us to call the desert a garden. It teaches us where to dwell while the desert is still a desert. It does not tell us to create danger so that God can prove himself. It teaches us to trust without testing. It does not give us permission to accuse those who suffer. It gives sufferers language with which to call upon God. And when God finally speaks, he does not say that trouble was imaginary. He says, I will be with him in trouble. That is the promise to carry into the connected wounds of human life. When fear enters the night, God is not absent. When danger becomes visible in daylight, God is not absent. When illness creates uncertainty, God is not absent. When grief changes the rooms of a home, God is not absent. When an answer takes longer than we hoped, God is not absent. And from the Christian horizon of the empty tomb, even when earthly life reaches its final boundary, God's saving presence has not surrendered. Psalm 91 is not a spell for controlling tomorrow. It is a confession about who holds us when tomorrow cannot be controlled. If this journey changed the way you understand the secret place, subscribe to Untold Psalms. Here we return to the biblical text, explore the tradition surrounding it, and look for the human struggle beneath the familiar words. And think of someone whose wilderness has changed shape. Someone carrying grief, uncertainty, exhaustion, illness, or fear. Share this film with them, not as a promise that nothing painful will happen, but as a reminder that they do not have to interpret pain as abandonment. The road may remain difficult. The night may still contain unanswered questions. But the final voice in the psalm does not belong to terror. It belongs to the one who says, He shall call upon me, and I will answer him. I will be with him in trouble. I will deliver him and honor him and show him my salvation. So when the storm does not immediately become calm, the question is no longer only, how do I escape? The deeper question is this: will I make my home in fear, or will I learn to dwell beneath the shadow of the one who remains with me in trouble?